I will never tell my parents how my grandparents really died. They wouldn't believe me if I did anyway. You may not either. About a month ago, I had just gotten out of class when I checked my phone. To my surprise, it was a voicemail from my father. Sure, Mom would call me from time to time since I left for college, but when I saw that my dad had called, I knew it was bad news. I just didn't know how bad at the time.
Son, we're buying you a plane ticket. You need to fly home right away. There's been an incident. Call me when you get this.
That was all the voicemail said. I called them, and he explained that my grandfather had been killed in an accident with a combine while harvesting his corn. That the shock had killed my grandmother and caused her to have a heart attack as well. The flight was nerve-wracking. I've never done well in small spaces. I couldn't smoke on the flight, which made it even worse. I spent the whole flight fidgeting and walking back and forth to the restroom, even though I didn't need to go. I just needed to move around. My dad was already waiting for me when I landed, which ruined my plans of sneaking a cigarette before he showed. He gave me a hug and helped me load my bags in the car. I decided I needed a cigarette bad enough to light one up in the parking garage. My dad had never seen me smoke, and I tried to act as casual as I could about it. He raised an eyebrow as he closed the trunk. I waited for a lecture or an outburst, but all he said was, "That's a nice lighter." I hadn't realized I was still fidgeting with it. I handed him the vintage trench lighter. Ellen, my girlfriend, bought it for me a few weeks ago. Found it at an antique store in Seattle. He took it in his hand and looked at it approvingly. Then he handed it back.
No smoking in the car. Your mother'd never let us hear the end of it.
My headache was gone by then, and I had a sufficient amount of nicotine in my system. I threw the cigarette down and stomped on it with my foot. An hour later, we were back at my parents' house, my mother greeting me with a hug. Then she stepped back and looked me up and down. "Your father used to smoke menthols too when he was your age," she said, giving my father a smirk. I wasn't sure if I was embarrassed that she'd caught me or surprised that Dad used to smoke. He gave me a pat on the shoulder and walked me into the house. We spent that night catching up on what I'd been doing since I was in college. They filled me in on how their business was struggling, but they were keeping their head above water. And then eventually, my dad filled me in on the details of the funeral. They had decided to do a closed casket on both my grandparents. The injuries to my grandfather had apparently been too gruesome for an open casket. They did a closed casket for my grandmother so that people would ask why. The next morning, we attended the funeral. There were only a few people there. My grandparents were in their 80s and had very few friends that were still around. Afterwards, we went back to my parents' house and ate.
Son, your mother and I have talked about it. We need to sell your grandparents' farm. We've neither the time or the money for upkeep. If you can take a week off of school and clean the place up, get it ready to sell, we'll give you 25% of whatever we get from the sale.
I took a large bite of chicken and chewed it over as I thought. I could call the school and explain the situation, and I could easily catch up later. Yeah, I can do that. But what do you mean, clean it up? How bad is it? My mother and father exchanged a worried look before she looked back at the plate.
Just before your grandparents passed, your grandmother called me. She told me that your grandfather had been diagnosed with dementia. Between that and their diminishing health, I suspect that the property's in pretty bad shape.
You haven't been out there? I asked. It wasn't more than a couple of hours away. I couldn't believe they hadn't visited. Mom replied in a defensive tone. We've both been working 7 days a week at the shop. We had to let our employees go. Business is not going too well. I nodded and asked what the plan was.
I'll drive you out there tomorrow. You can stay until I pick you up Friday. That gives you 6 days to get everything boxed up. I already ordered the boxes. They'll be delivered tomorrow.
The following day, my father drove me up to the old farm. I spent a few weekends there as a kid. The place always had a creepy vibe, but it was fun. I could walk through the corn all day and never reach the end. As we pulled up, I saw a large scarecrow that stood over the corn at the edge of the field. When did they get that thing? I asked. Dad didn't answer. Instead, he looked at it out of the corner of his eye. His face contorted into a look of intense worry, maybe even fear? I couldn't tell. As we passed the scarecrow, I looked back. The wind hit it just right for a second, and I could have sworn it turned its head to watch us. About 20 minutes after he dropped me off, I was still wandering through the house. evaluating the countless knickknacks and pictures, trying to decide what should be kept, what should be sold, and what should be tossed. The phone rang and my heart skipped a beat. It's been so long since I've heard a landline ring, I thought it might be a fire alarm. "This is Jim. I'm the delivery guy getting the boxes you ordered, but my GPS doesn't work out here. Can you give me directions?" the man asked as I answered the phone. "Head down the old country road about 5 miles. Make a right at the dirt road," I said, trying to think of any other landmarks I could give this guy. "You'll see a scarecrow. Make a right at that scarecrow." The man thanked me and hung up. About a half hour later, I was washing dishes in the sink and cleaning up the kitchen. My grandmother must have set out lunch before the accident, because there were 2 plates of food on the table. It was so rotten I couldn't even tell what it was anymore. The pungent smell of mold and rotten food was making me gag, so I had to open the kitchen window. I listened to the wind chimes on the porch and found it rather relaxing. I began to wonder how many summer days my grandparents had spent out on the porch, sipping sweet tea and listening to the wind. Over the wind chimes, I heard a scream from the field. I shut off the water and listened closer. I heard the scream again, almost as if someone was howling in pain. I rushed outside and stood at the edge of the corn. My grandfather had waited too long to harvest his crops. The sun had bleached the corn until it was now the color of bone. The stalks waved back and forth in the wind, the dry leaves rustling against each other as they swayed. I heard the noise again and began to walk out into the field towards the noise. "Hello," I yelled. I passed row after row of maize, looking left and right in the 8 inches of space between each row. And then in the distance, I saw a figure move. I began to run after it. I caught a glimpse of the figure every few seconds as the wind allowed. After a while, I lost sight of it. I ran faster and faster, trying to catch up with whatever it was, and then I ran full speed into the Scarecrow. The straw-filled body did little to dull the impact with the wooden post it was mounted on. I fell onto my back, grabbing my nose as I could feel my palm immediately filling with warm blood. I sat up and felt dizzy, my head throbbing with each beat of my heart. When I finally was able to stand up, I looked up at the Scarecrow. It was probably 7 feet tall, and then another 2 feet off the ground. It was dressed in blue overalls and red flannel. The head was a burlap bag with thick red string stitching its jagged mouth and big black buttons sewn on its eyes. It was topped with a straw hat stitched with the same red string used for the mouth. The thing was pretty intimidating at 6'2". Those crows must have been terrified, I thought to myself. I pinched my nose to stop the bleeding and began to look around. I saw this Scarecrow when we pulled in. There was no way I made it to the road already. I tried to hop up and see over the corn. I couldn't see anything but more corn, all the way to the horizon. As my feet hit the ground, my head felt like it might pop. Thick blood began to flow more quickly from my nose. I pinched my nose and held my head back, facing to the sky to stop the bleeding. Out of the corner of my eye, that's when I saw it. The Scarecrow had turned his head to face me. I turned to face the oversized doll and figured it must have been the wind again. For a second, we made eye contact. The big button eyes seemed to be looking right at me. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was the wind that had moved the head. It was just a bag filled with straw. It was just the wind blowing the stalks, and I imagined it had made them look like a figure running. It had even been the wind that was howling as it passed through the leaves. But still, as I stared at it, I knew it was staring back. The hair on my arm was beginning to rise, making my arms tingle. My heart began to quicken, and then the Scarecrow abruptly lifted its head and looked back over the field, staring. I ran as fast as I could in the opposite direction. I stole short glances over my shoulder as I pushed through the corn. All I could see was a path of broken stalks behind me. Soon I heard a rumbling noise behind me. A truck, I thought. I kept pushing on, my lungs beginning to burn with effort. My foot caught in a shallow irrigation ditch and sent me tumbling onto the dirt driveway. The driver of the truck locked up his brakes, skidding past me as he missed me by an inch. I laid there in the dust for a few seconds. The driver got out of the truck. "What is wrong with you?" he asked. His tone was harsh and angry. I stood up to face him. He was in his mid-40s with a big beard and an even bigger beer belly. "I'm sorry, I lost my footing," I said, looking back into the field, expecting to see the monster coming out to chase me again. The man followed my gaze into the field and then looked back at me. "You high, boy?" he asked seriously. I stopped myself. Telling him I was being chased by a scarecrow would only reinforce that accusation. I hit my head pretty hard, I said, placing a hand on my nose again. The driver nodded, then offered me a ride back to the house. I would have been here earlier if you knew how to give directions. There weren't no scarecrow at the road, he said. We pulled up to the house and began unloading the boxes he came to deliver. I'll be back Friday to pick them up once they're full. Your dad booked a storage shed on the other side of town. You have about 200 square feet, so keep that in mind as you pack, he said. He stared into the field. My daddy was a corn farmer in the next county. He didn't do half as well as you did here. Actually, now that I think about it, I drove past this place last year. I remember they had a rough crop. Do you know what they did different this year? The driver asked. No, I'm sorry, I have no idea, I answered. He nodded and spit. Well, take care of yourself. I'll see you on Friday. With that, he left. I went inside and grabbed a clean shirt. I washed the blood off my hands and face in the bathroom and changed. I tried to shake off the incident with the scarecrow. I must be more stressed out with the loss of my grandparents than I realized. I needed a distraction and began to pack the office downstairs. I was putting papers in a trash bag when I came across a letter my grandmother had written. Son, I need some help with your father. The dementia's getting worse. The last 2 days he's been raving like a lunatic. This spring a man came by and offered us a scarecrow as a gift. He said it did wonders for his crops and wanted to pay it forward. Your father told him no at first, thinking the man was a swindler, but he insisted he didn't want anything in return. Your father is now convinced that the scarecrow is the reason we had such a great crop this year, but the scarecrow won't let him harvest it. I left you several voicemails about this, and you haven't called me back, so I thought I would write you. Please, come help. I'm worried about your father. Mom. I put the letter down and sat in the office chair. I could dismiss my experience with the scarecrow as just stress or an overreactive imagination, but my grandfather having similar worries about the same scarecrow? What are the odds, I thought to myself. I needed a cigarette. I went outside to the porch and lit one. I took a long drag before exhaling. A cool breeze blew by, bringing the wind chimes to life. I turned around to look at them and see if one would be worth keeping. That's when I saw it. The scarecrow was just 20 feet away in the field. It hung on its post, staring at me. While I was trying to process this, it fell down. Well, more like hopped down. Immediately the post went up and then disappeared into the field. It couldn't be alive, I thought to myself. Seconds later, the scarecrow came out of the corn. It began running across the lawn, carrying the 10-foot post like a Trojan soldier running with a spear. The scarecrow launched the post. It sailed across the yard and missed me by a foot. It took down the wind chimes and impaled the wall behind me. I turned to run inside, but the post was now blocking my entrance. I hopped the rail on the porch and ran towards the old barn. I could hear the scarecrow running behind me, gaining on me, the straw rustling under his overalls and flannel. Once I was inside the barn, I tried to close the door, but it stuck fast from years of neglect. I grabbed the closest thing I could find as a weapon, a pitchfork. The scarecrow entered the room. Its jagged mouth and button eyes now seemed much more menacing as it marched towards me. I rammed the pitchfork into its chest as hard as I could. It pierced deep into its body easily, but it seemed to have no effect. With its left hand, or burlap mitten really, it grabbed my arm. The thing was impossibly strong. It used its right hand to pull the pitchfork out and then turned it towards me. I struggled uselessly against its grip. I desperately searched my pocket for something I could use as a weapon. I took my lighter out and flipped the top open. The flame caught almost instantly. In seconds, the scarecrow was fully engulfed. I let him go and fled into the field. The field was burning in less than an hour. The fire department said it was overly dry because it wasn't harvested on time. They didn't really have any interest in investigating the matter further. My father saw the post stuck in the wall when he picked me up. I knew he recognized it as the scarecrow's post because he didn't ask any questions about how it had gotten thrown through the wall and how the field had burned down. I know on some level he suspected the scarecrow killed his parents. I know on some level that he's grateful I killed it. But I know we will never discuss it because people would think we were crazy. I've had it since I was a baby. Left on the porch the day my mother brought me home from the hospital. Box unmarked, but adorned with a shiny red bow. We were never quite certain where it came from. "That's Jack." "It sure is cute," my mother remarked. "My 18th birthday was a few weeks ago, and we were cleaning out my old things. I'm going away to college next month, and Mom is planning on turning our storage area into a craft room." "Actually, I've always found it a little unsettling," I said, my face wrinkling as she passed it towards me. "It's got a certain peculiarity." I went to put it in the pile for the dump, but before I could drop it, she snatched it back. "Absolutely not. I've always loved Jack, and you need a piece of home to take with you to your new dorm. It's not like you can cover up with your baby blanket anymore." She placed her finger on the handle and began to turn it rhythmically. The haunting nursery rhyme sound began to fill the room, and it felt like the music was seeping into every crevice. I knew what was coming, but I still couldn't help but jump when the clown burst free of the box that held it captive. My mom laughed. "Honey, you have got to relax. I know you're stressed with all the changes coming up, but it will be great for you. Let's go get lunch, then you can come back to pack." She had a point. Moving away from home that I've always known did make me a little anxious. It's only ever been me and Mom. We've always been pretty close. I got up and went to change into some less grubby clothes for lunch. As I got near the doorway, something gave me pause. Couldn't quite explain it, but I felt the overwhelming urge to turn around. As I turned, I saw the clown staring back at me with its permanently sewn-on grin. "Sorry, buddy, I'm definitely not taking you with me." I slowly opened my eyes, the sunlight comfortingly warm on my face. I smelled the distinct aroma of my favorite childhood breakfast, chocolate chip pancakes and bacon. Moving day is finally here. I don't let myself feel the weight of it yet. Instead, I hop up and make my way downstairs. "There she is, the college girl. I thought you could use a little treat this morning," Mom said, coming over to squeeze me tight, her cheek against mine. "I'm so proud of you, honey. Now let's eat." After breakfast, I showered and got ready for the day ahead. I felt excited and nervous, but not sure which emotion was more prominent. I had already gathered my things at the bottom of the stairs the evening before. I could hear my mom loading everything into the back of the SUV, so I quickly brushed my hair and went down to help her. "Mom, I got it. You're going to throw your back out again." I lovingly nudged her out of the way before placing my belongings into the vehicle. After about 20 minutes of trying to arrange everything to fit, I finally solved the puzzle. "All right, Mom, we're ready to go," I yelled across the house. It already felt a little emptier. I leaned against the wall, taking it all in for what could be the last time for a while. I was moving 5 hours away, and without a car, making it back home wouldn't be easy. "Honey, look, you almost forgot it." Mom came down the stairs, holding the jack-in-the-box in her hand. Great. I wanted to leave that dreadful thing behind, but if it meant a lot to Mom, then whatever. I can toss it in a drawer or something. Certainly won't make any friends by leaving it on display. "Now we're ready," Mom said, grinning and giving me a big hug. It was time to hit the road. It was November, a few weeks before my first college final. I hadn't exactly adjusted amazingly to dorm life, but I couldn't complain either. My roommate Sarah was friendly enough, but our relationship was mostly like an older sister, constantly trying to give her dorky sibling a makeover. Me being the dork, of course. "You have to come out tonight. You've been studying way too much. It's only a couple of drinks with the guys. I won't take no for an answer. Honestly, you gotta get away from the dorm room. It's so stale." Sarah stared at me, waiting for a yes. The look on her face told me that I wasn't going to get out of this one. Begrudgingly, I agreed. About an hour later, yeah, it took her that long to get ready, we headed out. We were going to a local bar. It's basically a frat boy hangout. But I was content to have a beer and sit in the corner, pretending to have a good time before I made an excuse to head back to the dorm. The place was packed, full of students who didn't care about studying because they were here on Mommy and Daddy's money. Well, unlike most of them, I actually needed my good grades to keep my scholarship. Sarah found me at a small table and handed me a beer. "Drink, you'll feel better in no time." I could hardly hear her over the blaring music and the chaotic crowd of voices. I definitely needed a beer to get through the night. I chugged it down quickly. "Damn, kid, didn't think you had it in ya," Sarah remarked. I didn't either. I'm not usually a big drinker, but it was actually pleasant, so I ordered another one, along with some fries. It didn't take long before I started feeling what I assumed was an alcohol buzz. It was foreign to me. I'd never drank before. Was this really what it was like? Was I drunk? I felt out of control, floating almost. My vision blurred, and I could only just make out Sarah standing in front of me. "Where'd you come from?" My speech was a little slurred, but I didn't hear a thing, even though her lips were moving. "Huh?" She took my face in her hand and spoke loudly. I could hear her this time. "Let's get some fresh air." She escorted me outside the bar and into what looked like a spare parking lot in the back. It was dimly lit and a little spooky, but thank goodness it was quiet. "Be right back," she said, and then she was gone. It was definitely more spooky now that I was alone. I felt a hand on my back and assumed that Sarah had returned, so I spun around and it wasn't Sarah. Suddenly I was surrounded by 3 guys. The smell of cheap aftershave and alcohol mixed with nicotine in the air. Wait, I recognized some of these faces. They were the guys that Sarah and I had met up with at the bar. "Listen, if you're looking for Sarah, she already went back inside. Sarah told us you'd be here," said one of them. That was the last thing I remember about that night. Rather, it's the last thing my brain will let me remember. I woke up in my dorm room bed, scratches on my face and hands and chest and legs. My right eye has a giant bruise. My whole body hurts. I don't want to think about what happened to me in that parking lot. I didn't see Sarah. I wondered if she was hurt, or wondered where she was. I painfully sat up in bed. My vision was slightly blurry, but I could make out Sarah in her own bed. I grabbed her shoulder and gently shook her. "Sarah, are you okay? Please wake up." She stirred back to life. She saw my face and immediately gasped. "Jesus, kid, that may need stitches." That was it. No shock, no shouting. It was like she already knew what I was going to look like when she woke up. Wait, she looked perfectly fine. What was going on here? My mind started spinning back to the parking lot, back to Sarah leaving me to get back to the beer. The beer. You did this to me," I hissed at her. "How could you?" Tears started rolling down, stinging every scratch as they dripped off onto the floor. Her cheeks flushed, and I knew she was holding something back. I didn't know. They told me they were just going to scare you. I never meant for you to get hurt." But there's hardly any emotion in her voice. "Bullshit. You knew what they were putting in my drink, and you knew you were going to leave me alone in that parking lot. You're a monster." I stormed out of the room. I had nowhere to go, but I slouched down by the trees and cried. One of my study buddies found me there. Seeing Jordan's face brought me comfort. She let me come back to her dorm room. I was too upset to tell her what had happened, what I remembered and didn't remember. I fell into a deep slumber on my bed and didn't wake up until early the next morning. Jordan was asleep on the floor. I slowly tiptoed out of her bed and grabbed a glass of water. I needed to go home. I just wanted my mom. Usually, Sarah didn't wake up until 10 on Sundays, so I decided to go pack a bag and try to find a bus to get me home as soon as possible. As I began to turn the key for my room, something immediately felt wrong. I'm scared to open the door, but my need to get home was more powerful, so I did, and then I saw it. Jack. Jack was in the middle of the floor, still smiling his permanent grin. But how? I couldn't hear anything over the sound of my own heartbeat. My breathing was quick and shallow. My arms were covered in chill bumps. Then, oh God, I
finally took my eyes off the grinning little clown and saw Sarah. She was lying in her bed, her throat sliced open. She was surrounded by a pool of blood, and it was still dripping down onto the cold tile floor. The sound of my heartbeat was now replaced by the sound of the dripping. Drip, drip, drip. The door was locked. The window was closed. Who could have done this? There had been no one in here but Sarah. And Jack. Drip, drip, drip. He's always been unsettling. But there's no way. It doesn't make any sense. Nothing makes sense. My breathing is even more shallow. My vision began to fade. I thought I was going to pass out again. I thought I woke up on the floor. There's barely any sunlight coming through the windows. The whole day had passed. Suddenly, everything came flooding back. Sarah and Jack. Where are they? I didn't see Sarah on the bed. I didn't see Jack either. There was no more dripping. Just silence. Even the bloodstains were gone. It was like she was never here. But I know what I saw. The thought of it makes me vomit onto the floor. I was shaking. The sound of my heartbeat filled my head again. I heard something else now. Something like music. I crawled towards the sound. I'd heard it before. My brain was having trouble putting it together. I crawled closer. It sounded so familiar. Then I placed it. Jack. The tune is now more haunting than I ever could have imagined. Do I dare inch any closer to it? I have to. I have to know. It's coming from outside the storage bin, where I put it so many months ago. I slowly opened the drawer to see it. That grin. That red nose. Jack. I grabbed it and ripped open the door to the dorm hallway. I run as fast as my legs will take me and dump it into the nearest trash bin. I still hear the music playing as I walked away. I heard it all. Sarah's voice, my breathing, and the drip, drip, drip. It was December 23rd, and I was sitting next to my mom on the couch, underneath the quilt my late grandmother had made before she died. Christmas tunes hummed low in the background as my mom snored. The embers in the fireplace glowed red hot beneath the log that had burst itself in half. Bernice, our cat, slept quietly in the spot she claimed as a kitten. Home. I wasn't sure if I'd ever make it back after everything that happened, but now it was a few days off from Christmas, and life felt almost normal again. At least I had tried to make it feel normal. It wasn't easy. Those thoughts cut through the silence sometimes, when you least expected it. Suddenly, my brain whispered a single name. Sarah. They never found Sarah. As a roommate, I was naturally questioned. I said I hadn't seen her since the night at the bar. I wasn't sure how I had ever come up with an explanation for the events that occurred. I'm not sure I know what happened. Sometimes I try to convince myself that I imagined it all. All I know for certain is that Jack's gone. Cast off to some far-off landfill, hopefully smashed into a million pieces and burned for good measure. Doesn't matter now. All that matters is that I'm home. I let my thoughts get taken over by the sound of the fireplace crackling, Christmas carols, and what is that? It was quiet, but it was there. I sit up on the couch and tilt my head back towards the stairs. I turned the radio off so I could hear more clearly. It couldn't be. I listened closer. There's no denying it this time. Jack. The music stopped, just short of the moment where Jack would come flying out freely from his metal cage. The house went completely silent. I walked towards the stairs, and Suddenly I froze in place, terrified to shift my gaze upward. Do it. Just do it, I told myself. It's a stupid clown in a stupid box that might not even be there. You're probably just dreaming. Finally, I looked up towards the landing. Jack, the same grin as always, stared back at me. I felt dizzy and nauseous, my head pounding. I thought I might. I heard birds chirping. I opened my eyes. What time was it? I was just sitting on the couch with my mom. She must have helped me to bed last night. I remember having a terrible dream that the clown was back. What a nightmare. I really should see about getting in with a therapist one of these days. I made my way back towards the stairs. I wondered if Mom was up. It's Christmas Eve, and our tradition is always to open up a gift today. I'm really excited to see her reaction to everything I picked out for her. I headed down and walked into the kitchen. I startled myself. I keep forgetting Mom's kitchen redecoration included a very ill-placed mirror. I shook it off and laughed at myself. Then I saw there was a note on the kitchen counter. Honey, had to run out early for errands. Go check the living room table. There's a surprise waiting for you. Love, Mom. My Christmas Eve gift. I wanted to wait for her, but she clearly wanted me to have it early, and I can hardly stand anticipation. As soon as I entered the living room, I saw the box on the table. It was wrapped in snowflake paper and topped with a beautiful silver bow. I wondered what it could be. I secretly hoped there would be meticulously hidden holes to allow air for a new kitten. Doubtful. Time to just open it up and see, I guess. I untied the bow and gently lifted the lid off the box. I thought I saw what looked like fur. Could it be my kitten after all? I had to find out, so I fully removed the box lid, hands a bit shaky with excitement, and I screamed as I fell to the floor. My heart felt like it had dropped all the way to my feet. I couldn't breathe or think or function at all. It wasn't fur. It was hair. My mom's severed head lay inside the box. Cold, lifeless marble slits where her eyes used to be. Her ruby red lipstick is perfectly in place. My lifeline. My best friend. My home. I felt like I was going to spiral into nothingness. I had to call for help. Who cared about the explanation? My mother was gone. Someone or something needed to pay. My whole life had been ripped away from me in an instant. I managed to pick myself up off the floor and stumbled back across the house into the kitchen to find the phone. Instead, I saw another pair of lifeless eyes looking back into mine. In that instant, I knew there was no escape from this. He was there in the beginning. He'll be there until the end. Jack.
Imaginary friends. We've all had them. Oh, sure, we all get the occasional creepypasta about them. But, at worst, they're just a symptom of treatable mental illness. They're never actually real. And yet, right now, I'm not so sure. I don't know if it was my daughter's imaginary friend that did this to her, but what happened to my daughter, only 2 weeks ago no less, was a horrific tragedy. And I don't think the imaginary friend she had before was completely non-compliant in it. Okay, let's start at the beginning. I used to be just a normal mom. My name's Ella. My daughter, Susan, is 5. Now, she'll be 5 forever. Off topic there. Susan used to go to kindergarten outside town. We live in Blackthorn, Ohio. Her teacher, Miss Adina, actually lived 2 doors down from us, and she'd been nothing but an angel to me and my Susan, especially during this awful time. Honestly, don't know what I would do without that wonderful woman. But it was during her kindergarten that the fiasco started. I came to pick her up, and she told me she'd made a friend at school. Oh, really?
What's their name? Thelma, she said cheerfully. She's invisible and lives in a giant playground world full of stars she created. At this point, I, of course, figured Thelma was imaginary. She sounds wonderful, I said. She is. Miss Adina told me to stay back and clean the toy corner during break time. At first I thought it would be boring, but then Thelma showed up and magically cleaned it, and we spent the rest of break time playing together. Susan always had such an imagination, and she was such a big talker. On the ride home, Susan described her new friend's appearance. She's black all over, and her clothes and hair are too. She's got little white dots sparkling all over her, and she says she's 7 years old. I thought it was just adorable at the time. That night, Susan came to me saying that Thelma would be staying at our house for the week, and she would be playing with her. Oh, okay, I said again, with an amused smile. The next day, Susan came home with another story about Thelma. She opened up a way to her world during break time, and we played in there all day. She said soon she's going to let me stay forever. At this point, I got mildly concerned. Susan, Thelma's imaginary. You know that, right? Susan just giggled. No, she's not. She's sitting next to me in the car right now. And she pointed at an empty seat next to her. I was relieved to know that this wasn't anyone grooming Susan at school, but I was mildly concerned for her psyche at this point. But through mental gymnastics, I erased my worries. She's just pretending, I said to myself. Lots of kids have imaginary friends at her age. She'll get over it. She's not insane. It's probably just me. And maybe I was. I know that I'm probably insane now. Susan came home from school the next day with a concerned look on her face. Thelma doesn't like you, she said in the car. She says you're boring and always telling me what to do, and she hates that. That night, there were more mental gymnastics on my part. Thelma isn't real. Thelma isn't real, I repeated to myself over and over again. For the next few days, until the end of the week, it was normal. Susan coming home from school each day with a new story about what she and Thelma did together that day. Until Sunday. On Sunday morning, Susan told me that Thelma was going to take her to her world tonight. I didn't respond. It was an odd combination of scared, in denial, and angry at myself for being worried about this. It's just an imaginary friend. Just an imaginary friend. Just an imaginary friend. On Monday morning, I woke up, but I couldn't find Susan anywhere. The police were called, but they didn't find her either. I was hating myself, while at the same time trying to reassure myself that it wasn't Thelma who had done this. And yet, just last week, the police found Susan's body. She was discovered in a tree in the forest in our town, with 7 different stab wounds and a terrified expression on her face. Now I don't know whether it really was someone grooming her, whether someone else was in on the act, or whether it was something else entirely. If anyone knows anything about Susan or Thelma, please tell me. I need to know, and I need to know now. I knew a man once named Dr. Ford Ashley. He was a brilliant biochemist and my mentor for the better part of 3 years. When I met Dr. Ashley in June of 2005, he was a character to behold. He stood at 6 foot even and was as thin as a pencil. He had very pale skin and a very slight, consistent cough. He greeted me in his lab with a smile and a weak handshake before coughing into a white handkerchief that seemed to always be in his hand. By this point, I had completed most of my schooling and was looking for an expert to help hone my skills and start my own lab someday. Ford, as I had come to call him, was at first very introverted. He told me about the things he was getting paid to work on and taught me various techniques to make things faster and easier. It wasn't until November of 2005 that I started to learn more about him and his personal goals. Whenever there was free time in the lab, he would be searching for cures to various degenerative respiratory diseases. He was a visionary when it came to this, always knowing the outcome before asking the question, it seemed. Around the anniversary of when I started with Ford, I began to learn his true motivations. Up until this point, it seemed that Ford had spent nearly all of his time in the lab. I would sometimes leave late in the night and return early the next morning, only to find him still toiling away. He never seemed to need to sleep. It was July of 2006 when that slight cough got significantly worse, to the point that he began leaving red and black splotches on the handkerchief. I asked him about it one day, and he would only say that it was a bad cold or some other common ailment. I walked into the lab one morning in late July and noticed that Ford wasn't there. This had never happened before. I'd always either met him there or, more commonly, found him there working. I called his name and got no answer. I didn't think much of it, so I started getting ready for the day, checking the equipment and whatnot, when I noticed that the door next to his office was slightly ajar. I went to the door and called out for Ford once more. As I opened the door, I saw the crumpled form of Dr. Ashley lying on the floor, blood and black ooze pooling around his head. I rushed to him and propped him up in a chair, and thankfully he woke up. I asked what had happened, and he asked for a glass of water. I saw that I could get no further questions at this time, so I got him some water and went out to get us breakfast across the street. To my surprise, the day carried on as normal from there. When we were getting ready to lock up the lab that night, Ford explained the details of his condition. Since he was a kid, Ford was near constantly sick. Never anything major. He never went to the doctor. It was always just a slight, dull, ill feeling, as he described it. The most notable symptom was an ever so slight cough, near imperceptible if you weren't looking. Steadily, the ailment worsened. Not extremely, just taking more physical forms. When he was about 20, the cough became more prominent, and his skin became a sickly shade of pale. He said it felt like his bones became frailer as well, though he never got it tested. Those worsening conditions fueled Ford's interest in the medical field. He went to school for years, studying anything and everything he could. He went to doctors, though none of them saw anything specifically wrong with him. Dr. Ashley became cynical of the outside world, starting a life of seclusion and deciding that he would be the only one who could save himself. That was, I suppose, until he met me. After learning this, we both took some time off. We came back to the lab in August of 2006, though I suspect that Ford had been there all along. Very soon after we got back into the swing of things, Ford clued me in on his plan. What I'm about to tell you will sound like some nonsensical science fiction, but Ford somehow had made a working prototype. His plan was to counteract his body's weakness, which he found out was some sort of rapid cell decay, by absorbing the essence of living things. Ford rolled back his sleeves to show me how it was done. Tubes now ran like lines of veins down his arm. He took off his shirt to reveal that the tubes ran out of his back as they plunged into a sort of grinder-like device. The device could be handheld, and it had a large enough opening to fit a coconut. At first, Ford would leave it on his desk somewhere, and whenever he was feeling particularly ill, he would plug it in and feed it a houseplant or two. I was terrified of the machine for some reason. It somehow felt cold and distant, not just because it was an inanimate machine, but in a way that only a severely depraved human could feel cold and distant. A bit of time passed on like that, and I got used to it. It was now April 2007, and Ford seemed healthier than ever. He got rid of the handkerchief, and even started going for walks at the local park whenever he had a chance to get away from the lab. He seemed happy for a change. Then, all of a sudden, his condition rapidly started to deteriorate. He ended up worse than he had started, skin beginning to dry up in patches and fall off completely. He was coughing near constantly, and half the time blood was coming up. He could barely stand. Here's where I did the first of a few terrible things to come. Ford collapsed once again, and his breathing was ragged. I could tell he would die if I didn't do something soon. I plunged him into the machine and threw some plants into it, but it did nothing. My mind raced, and all of a sudden, my feet carried me over to the lab and down the hall. There was another lab that tested beauty products in the small building. I went to that lab and grabbed a rat. I don't know how I did exactly what I did next, but I threw the rat into the jaws of that awful machine. Ford perked up a moment later, thanking me profusely, then consoling me. He said it was a necessary evil, and at the time, I believed him. We got back to work for a few days when, for the first time ever, Dr. Ashley actually wasn't there. I searched around for him, but I didn't see him. Everything was locked up properly, and I noticed that the machine was gone. Ford didn't show up all day, but I got a decent amount of work done regardless. The next day, Ford apologized for his absence and said he had a family emergency he had to tend to. I didn't think anything of it. Midway through the day, Ford asked if I wanted to go on a walk in the local park. He said he'd found a pretty spot overlooking a large field. I told him I would, though we'd probably be gone for the rest of the day, as the park was a very large nature preserve. Ford was adamant and said we could take the rest of the day off. So off we went into the woods of the park and began to climb up a mountain. I hadn't had too much time to explore this place as a kid, so I was following every twist and turn as Ford took them. It started to get late when I noticed that Ford wasn't carrying the machine. I don't know how I hadn't noticed this, but I assumed it was at his house or something. Slowly, day becoming night, just as we got to the mouth of a cave, I had a very uneasy feeling at this point. But Ford somehow convinced me that if we were lost, we could spend the night in the cave. It was a fairly tight squeeze to get in, the entrance maybe 3 feet tall, and it was decently well hidden behind hanging moss. I wondered how Ford had been able to spot this. The mouth of the cave looked unstable, like any sudden force or any sort of weight behind it could collapse the whole thing. My eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness, and I saw horrors I couldn't believe. I saw bloodied and torn up bones, hunks of flesh and blood splattered everywhere, and handprints on the wall. I tried to let out a scream, but my mouth wouldn't open. "Why are you so scared?" a crazed voice echoed through the darkness. "Can't you see? This is progress. You helped me make everything I ever wanted. This is all because of you." I ran for the exit as I heard and saw the machine hum to life. I looked back to find Ford already upon me. I managed to dodge out of the way enough so that his attack only grazed my leg. But he still managed to saw a chunk of meat clean off the leg. I pushed and punched at him, maybe a few times. It's hard to remember, but I managed to make some distance. I sprinted for the cave entrance and jumped out into the cold night air. I slammed at the entrance to the cave as I heard the whirring of gears come closer at a rapid pace. Finally, the rocks began to fall, sealing off the cave with piles and piles of loose earth. The device that Ford had wielded shifted from a brilliant man's magnum opus, his font of life, to a hungering steel maw devoid of any emotion. I don't know for sure how many people he had killed. Ford had been overtaken by lunacy. He had become nothing more than an animal whose only goal was survival. I sometimes pity the man to this day, even after all he did, as he didn't fail in the end. The maw became too hungry, and when I unsealed the cave I had trapped him in for days, the machine had eaten most of his body. It was either wholly gone or shredded beyond recognition. No one knew who Dr. Ashley was or that he had even died. At least until now, I suppose. What can I say to these people? The community center is filled with cigarette smoke. Everyone here sits in a circle of chairs to complain about their bosses, how they get called to come into work even when they're approved for time off, how they get screwed out of holiday bonuses or maternity care and more. I don't say anything when I come here. I sit quietly and listen and think about how I got where I am. When it's my turn to talk, I pass. It's not like I'm going to say these people have it easier than I do. My story started in my sophomore year of college. During that time, I didn't have many options in way of employment. The few people who were willing to work around my classes already had enough workers and weren't hiring. Thankfully, there were plenty of odd jobs listed on the cork board scattered around campus. Most of them didn't pay much and only required a few hours of your time. But the pay was better than nothing, and I'd rather eat ramen every day for a month than nothing at all. Unfortunately, lots of people were in the same boat, so all these jobs were first come, first serve. Eventually, I found one asking for a handyman. I don't know my way around tools, but I was young and dumb enough to justify that with the aid of a good YouTube tutorial, I could easily learn how to install sinks or change the oil in a car. When I arrived for my first day, my initial impression of Professor Borgenson was that he didn't look like any professor I'd ever seen. He was tall, but very thin. His hair was dark, but there was some gray at the temples, making him look older than he was. If I had to guess, he was in his early 30s. He explained that the job was easy, and the first thing I would have to do would be to remind him to eat. I found that a little funny and smiled, but he was serious. He then explained that he often gets lost in his work and forgets little things like that. When he told me the pay, I accepted the job right away. I'd begin every day by brewing his coffee in a pot, which he would serve himself. Thankfully, my classes were close, so this never interfered with my day. I'd do this again between 2 and 4 in the afternoon each day as well. The second time I went to his office, I would call restaurants and either have them deliver to him or pick up something for him to eat. In less than a week, he told me to keep the coffee coming, but he didn't need me to order food every day. After a few months, he started to tell me to do things that made me nervous. First, it was things like grabbing a file from some other office, but would escalate to picking up packages in weird and occasionally terrifying places. Before long, he had me taking chemicals out of the lab without proper paperwork. Each time I approached him about this, he would say that everything was above board and not to worry about it. When the chem lab treated the chemicals I took as though they were stolen, I went to Borgenson and told him about it, begging him to clear this up. That was when I learned that Borgenson was using this information to blackmail me. As horrible as he wasn't completely unsympathetic to my situation, and agreed to give me my college credits if I kept doing the jobs he asked me to do. I didn't have much of a choice. At this point, he had enough information to get me expelled from school, so I continued to work for him. Besides, who would the police be more likely to believe? Me, or a man who was up for an award in excellence in laboratory science for neurological research? After that, I stole copper wire for him. He required so much that I was working on it for the better part of a month. Sometimes the buildings I stole from were being developed. Other times it was someone's house who happened to be gone for the holidays. I tried to ask him what kind of experiments he was working on, but everything I asked, he would fly into a fit of rage and frustration, complaining about how hard the work he was doing really was, and that he didn't have time to go into details because it would surely go over my head. In my junior year, he started using me as an alibi, either to get out of some kind of trouble or as an excuse so he could leave and return to his secretive experiments. Every time he'd have me meet somebody, he'd coach me on what to say to them and when to say it. I'm abruptly taken out of my thoughts when the next person in the support group starts talking. I'm only half paying attention. I'm thinking about Borgenson and staring at the same 3 triangles on the floor. I hear her say something about compensation for driving. A slight smile crept over my face when I heard this, because I wished I had that woman's problems. At least Borgenson gave me a truck and refunded me on the gas I used when I drove around, picking up the freshest roadkill I could find. During my senior year, I learned about Professor Borgenson's connections with some people in the school's zoology department. I discovered this when I actually had the official paperwork to pick up the body of howler monkeys and the body of a bonobo ape. I had been in his house a few times, but the first time I was allowed inside was right before the hurricane was about to make landfall. I thought I was called to help him prepare his house for the rain, but instead it was to do something I was not prepared for. It smelled of the same chemicals that I had stolen for him, and a coppery smell that was not unlike the scent of blood. In his upstairs bedroom was a makeshift lab, and in it was the body of a huge and hideous creature, strapped to a table and submerged in ice. It was hard to see the body, but to me it was as though he'd stitched many of them together. Borgenson was in a rush and was in no mood to answer questions. He needed to do this experiment before the storm hit, and since he still had all the blackmail material over my head, I did too. After hours of telling me to flip a switch here or press a button there, the hurricane was right on top of us. I wanted to stop, but Borgenson insisted that we keep at it, and that it was now or never. I was terrified as the gale force wind broke the windows. Borgenson had to yell over it for me to hear his instructions, but eventually he gave this creature a pulse. Since we were on the second floor and the hurricane was tearing the house apart all around us, we had to bring this unconscious body down to the main floor, where Borgenson had converted a small room into a cage. Borgenson and I were barely able to get to the basement by the time the hurricane tore the house apart. As the water rose and the violent sound of wind filled my ears, I prayed that I would get out of this. Borgenson, on the other hand, was only concerned about the thing he had created. When it was all over and the hurricane had passed, we discovered the body of the creature had been crushed and died. There is supportive clapping when the last speaker is done telling their story. I clap along, and when it's the next person's turn to speak, I keep my chin on my chest and return to my thoughts. The next person complains about unpaid wages, but I can't relate to that. Borgenson was many things, but he was not a wage thief, and paid me for everything I'd done. Disgruntled by the loss of his creature, Borgenson left me alone, and I was able to focus on my studies. The rare times I saw him were when I prepared his coffee. It was during one of these times that he told me that since I was a senior and wouldn't be around forever, he was searching for a new assistant. After telling me this, he solemnly shook his head and gave me my last payment with a generous bonus, especially for someone with my financial situation. I couldn't have been happier, not because of the money, but because I was finally free of the man who I learned to hate with every fiber of my being. I would soon graduate and move back to my hometown, where I would spend 10 years repressing the memories of Professor Borgenson. A man in the group who goes by Barry is the next to speak. He complains about his boss calling him into work on pre-approved days off. I feel for him. In a weird way, I can relate. Thought I was done with Borgenson, but then one night a stranger comes to Moe's bar, my place of employment. He seems friendly, and even though he didn't look familiar, I saw something in his eyes that reminded me of what I'd seen in the mirror after a night doing Borgenson's bidding. Once the barflies started making their way out, the stranger confessed that he was the newest assistant to Borgenson, and the only reason he was at the bar was because Borgenson was in town and needed my help. I refused, but when the stranger told me that Borgenson still had the blackmail material, and if I didn't come along, he was going to use it against me. When Barry wraps up his story, everyone claps, and it snaps me out of my memories and returns me to the present. It's my turn to speak. I've been coming to the support group for a long time, but I've never said more than 2 words. After all, what can I say? That if I could, I'd trade my position with any of these people. That they should get on their knees and thank their lucky stars for not having bosses that blackmail them. That Borgenson still forces me to do things for him, like stealing bodies from the morgue. There's only one answer I can come up with. Pass.